I will never forget that sunny September morning in New York City. I was 63 years old, and after years of dreaming about it, I was finally visiting the Statue of Liberty. My granddaughter had given me this trip as a birthday present, and I was filled with excitement and emotion. I had always wanted to see Lady Liberty up close, to feel that sense of freedom and hope that millions of immigrants felt when they first arrived in America. I wore my favorite floral dress, the one that made me feel beautiful despite my size 24 body, and I had my camera ready to capture every moment of this special day. The ferry was crowded with tourists from all over the world. Families with children, couples holding hands, groups of friends laughing and taking selfies. The atmosphere was festive, full of anticipation and joy. I found a spot near the railing where I could see the statue as we approached. The wind was blowing through my silver hair, and I felt alive, free, happy. This was my moment. After years of putting everyone else first, my husband who passed away 5 years ago, my children, my grandchildren, this trip was just for me. A celebration of my life, my survival, my existence in this world that hasn't always been kind to women like me. As the ferry started moving away from Manhattan, I noticed a group of young women in their 20s standing nearby. They were dressed in trendy clothes, taking endless photos, laughing loudly. I smiled at them, that automatic friendly gesture that comes naturally to me. I've always believed in spreading kindness wherever I go. But instead of smiling back, one of them, a tall blonde with oversized sunglasses, looked me up and down with such obvious disgust that I felt my smile freeze on my face. She whispered something to her friends, and they all turned to look at me, their expressions ranging from amusement to contempt. I tried to ignore them and turned back to face the water, focusing on the beautiful skyline of Manhattan behind us. But then I heard it. That voice, loud and clear, cutting through the sounds of the engine and the excited chatter of other tourists. "Oh my God, look at that disgusting fat old woman taking up so much space on the railing. Doesn't she know she should stay home instead of subjecting people to that sight?" The words hit me like a physical blow. My heart started racing, my face burned with shame, and I felt tears threatening to spill from my eyes. I couldn't believe someone would say something so cruel, so publicly, so deliberately meant to hurt me. I turned around slowly, and there she was, the blonde woman, looking directly at me with a smirk on her face. Her friends were giggling nervously, some looking uncomfortable, but none of them telling her to stop. Other tourists were staring now, some with sympathy in their eyes, others with curiosity, and a few with that same contemptuous look that the blonde woman wore. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like I was standing there naked and being judged by everyone. My throat tightened, and I couldn't find my voice. All those years of dealing with comments about my weight, all the times I had been made to feel less than human because of my size, came flooding back in that moment. The blonde woman wasn't done. She pulled out her phone and started recording a video, narrating loudly enough for everyone to hear. "So here we are on the ferry to the Statue of Liberty, and we have to share the space with this huge old lady who probably ate all the food in the buffet this morning. I mean, seriously, how is this fair to the rest of us? We paid the same price for our tickets, but she's taking up space for 3 people. Her friends were laughing now, some still looking uncomfortable, but not stopping her. Other tourists were starting to react. Some were recording on their phones too. Others were whispering to each other, and a few were visibly angry at what they were witnessing. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to melt into the floor of that ferry and cease to exist. Every insecurity I had ever felt about my body came rushing to the surface. I thought about all the times I had been treated as less than because of my weight. The doctor appointments where my concerns were dismissed and everything was blamed on my size. The restaurants where I was given the worst tables in dark corners. The stores where salespeople followed me around as if I might damage their merchandise. The airplanes where I felt every passenger's eyes on me as I walked down the aisle hoping my seatbelt would fit. And now this, on what was supposed to be one of the most special days of my life. A celebration of my existence, a moment of joy and freedom. But then something happened. Something shifted inside me. Maybe it was the anger that started bubbling up beneath the shame. Maybe it was the memory of my late husband telling me I was beautiful every single day of our 40 years together. Maybe it was thinking about my granddaughter who had saved money from her part-time job to give me this trip, who told me she wanted me to have adventures and make memories. Maybe it was the realization that I had survived 63 years on this planet, raised 3 children, buried parents and a spouse, worked 2 jobs to put food on the table, volunteered in my community, made a difference in people's lives, and I was not going to let this cruel stranger take this moment away from me. I stood up straighter. I took a deep breath. And before I could talk myself out of it, I spoke. My voice was shaking at first, but it grew stronger with each word. Excuse me, but I paid for my ticket just like everyone else here. I have every right to be on this ferry and to enjoy this experience. Your comments are hurtful, disrespectful, and completely unnecessary. I am a human being who deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of my size or age. The blonde woman looked shocked that I had responded. She had probably expected me to slink away in shame, to validate her cruelty by accepting it silently. But I wasn't going to do that. Not today. Not ever again. Several other passengers started speaking up too. An older gentleman with a kind face said, "Young lady, you should be ashamed of yourself. This woman has done nothing to you, and your behavior is absolutely unacceptable." A mother with 2 young children said, "I don't want my daughters to witness this kind of bullying. You need to stop immediately." A middle-aged couple who had been taking photos together turned their camera toward the blonde woman and said, "We're recording this too, and if you don't apologize right now, we're going to make sure this video goes viral and everyone sees what kind of person you really are." The tide was turning, and the blonde woman's confident smirk was starting to fade. If this story of a courageous plus-size woman has already moved you, leave your like now so that more people can watch this video. My name is Margaret Elizabeth Thompson, but everyone calls me Maggie. I was born in 1962 in a small town in Ohio, the youngest of 5 children in a working-class family. My father worked at the local steel mill, and my mother was a seamstress who took in alterations to help make ends meet. We didn't have much money, but we had love, laughter, and a strong sense of community. I learned early on the values of hard work, kindness, and resilience. My mother used to say, "Maggie, life will throw stones at you, but you can either let them break you or use them to build something beautiful." I carried those words with me throughout my entire life, though I didn't always remember them in my darkest moments. I was always a bigger girl, even as a child. While my sisters were petite and delicate, I was solid, sturdy, strong. My mother never made me feel bad about it. She said I had good, strong bones, and that I would grow up to be a woman who could handle anything life threw at her. But the world outside my loving home wasn't as kind. Other children teased me at school, calling me names and excluding me from games. I learned to develop a thick skin and a sharp wit, using humor as both a shield and a sword. If I could make people laugh, maybe they wouldn't notice my size. If I could be useful, helpful, indispensable, maybe they would see my value beyond my appearance. I met my husband, Robert, when I was 22 years old. He was working as a mechanic at the garage where I brought my car for an oil change. He was kind funny, and he looked at me like I was the most beautiful woman in the world. On our first date, he told me he loved that I was substantial. His word, because it meant there was more of me to love. He never once made me feel like I needed to change or lose weight to be worthy of his affection. We got married a year later, and he remained my biggest supporter and cheerleader for the next 40 years until cancer took him from me 5 years ago. Losing Robert was the hardest thing I've ever been through, and there were days when I wasn't sure I wanted to keep living in a world without him. Together, Robert and I built a good life. We had 3 children, Sarah, Michael, and Jennifer, and I threw myself into motherhood with everything I had. I was the mom who volunteered for every school event, who baked cookies for every bake sale, who drove the carpool and hosted the sleepovers and made Halloween costumes from scratch. I worked part-time as a receptionist at a dental office while the kids were young, then full-time as an administrative assistant at a law firm once they were all in school. Robert and I weren't wealthy, but we managed to give our children a stable, loving home, to put food on the table, and to save a little bit for their college educations. As I got older and my children grew up and moved away, I faced new challenges. My weight increased over the years, especially after menopause and after Robert's death. Food had always been a comfort to me, a way to soothe difficult emotions, a connection to happy memories. My mother's recipes, the meals Robert loved, the cookies my grandchildren requested. Food was love in my family, and I used it to fill the empty spaces in my heart. I tried various diets over the years, always with the same result. Some initial weight loss followed by gaining it all back, and then some. Eventually, I decided to stop fighting my body and to focus instead on being healthy and happy at whatever size I was. But that decision didn't make living in a fat-phobic world any easier. By the time I turned 60, I had 7 grandchildren who I adored more than life itself. I babysat them regularly, took them to parks and museums, read them stories, and taught them to bake. My oldest granddaughter, Emma, who was 15 at the time, started noticing how I was treated differently because of my size. She saw the way servers in restaurants sometimes rolled their eyes when they seated us at a table, the way salespeople in stores followed me around suspiciously, the way strangers felt entitled to comment on what I was eating or to offer unsolicited advice about my health. Emma got angry on my behalf, but I always told her it was okay, that I was used to it, that it didn't bother me. But the truth was it did bother me. Every single time. I just didn't know what to do about it, or if there was anything I could do. When Emma turned 18 and graduated from high school, she gave me the most precious gift I had ever received: a trip to New York City to visit the Statue of Liberty. She had been saving money from her part-time job at a coffee shop for over a year. She told me, "Grandma, you've spent your whole life taking care of everyone else. You deserve to have adventures and make memories just for you. I want you to see Lady Liberty and feel free, because you are the strongest, most amazing woman I know." I cried when she gave me the ticket confirmation. I had always wanted to visit New York, to see the statue that represented hope and freedom to so many people, including my own grandparents who immigrated from Ireland in the early 1900s. The weeks leading up to the trip, I was filled with excitement but also anxiety. I worried about fitting in the airplane seat, about keeping up with the walking required in New York, about being judged by sophisticated New Yorkers who would see me as a frumpy old woman from Ohio. I almost canceled the trip several times, making excuses about the expense or the timing. But Emma wouldn't let me back out. She helped me plan every detail, researched accessible transportation options, found restaurants with comfortable seating, and most importantly, she reminded me every single day that I deserved this experience. So I packed my bags, said goodbye to my family, and boarded the plane to New York with my heart full of hope and determination. The first 2 days in New York were magical. I stayed at a small hotel in Midtown Manhattan, and I spent my time visiting Central Park, walking through Times Square, eating amazing food, and soaking in the energy of the city. People were generally kind, and I felt relatively anonymous in the crowds, just another tourist among millions. I took countless photos to show Emma and my other grandchildren, and I felt proud of myself for taking this adventure alone. But I was most excited about the day I would visit the Statue of Liberty. That was the centerpiece of the entire trip, the experience I had been dreaming about for months. I woke up early that morning, put on my favorite dress, and headed to Battery Park to catch the ferry to Liberty Island, my heart full of anticipation for what should have been the highlight of my trip. Standing on that ferry, with the blonde woman's cruel words echoing in my ears and dozens of strangers staring at me, I felt something inside me crack open. It wasn't just the humiliation of that specific moment. Though that was painful enough, it was the weight of every similar experience I had endured throughout my entire 63 years of life. It was like a dam breaking, and all the pain, shame, and anger I had been holding back for decades came flooding through. My hands were shaking, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest, and I felt dizzy, disoriented, like the deck of the ferry was tilting beneath my feet even though I knew the water was calm. The immediate physical response was overwhelming. My face felt hot, burning with embarrassment, and I could feel sweat trickling down my back despite the cool breeze coming off the water. My stomach clenched into a tight knot, and I felt nauseous, like I might actually be sick right there on the deck. My throat closed up, making it hard to breathe, and tears blurred my vision, even though I was desperately trying to hold them back. I didn't want to cry in front of these strangers, didn't want to give that cruel woman the satisfaction of knowing how deeply her words had wounded me. But my body was betraying me, responding to the trauma in ways I couldn't control no matter how hard I tried to maintain my composure. What made it worse was the public nature of the humiliation. If she had said those things to me quietly, in passing, it would still have hurt, but I could have processed it privately in my own time. But she had said it loudly, deliberately, making sure everyone around us could hear. She had turned me into a spectacle, an object of ridicule and pity. And now all these strangers were looking at me, forming opinions about me based on nothing more than my appearance and this horrible interaction. Some were sympathetic, I could see it in their eyes, but their pity almost made it worse. I didn't want to be pitied. I didn't want to be the poor fat old lady that people felt sorry for. I wanted to be invisible, to disappear, to have never gotten on this ferry in the first place. I thought about Emma, my precious granddaughter who had worked so hard to give me this gift. She had wanted me to have a beautiful, empowering experience, to feel free and joyful and proud. And instead, I was standing here being publicly mocked and humiliated. I felt like I had let her down, like I had proven all my fears correct, that someone like me didn't belong in spaces like this, that I should have stayed home where I was safe from judgment and cruelty. The guilt mixed with the shame and the anger, creating a toxic emotional cocktail that made me feel physically ill. I wanted to call Emma and tell her what happened, but I also couldn't bear the thought of ruining her gift by admitting how badly this experience was going. The worst part was the feeling of powerlessness. I had dealt with discrimination and cruelty because of my size my entire life, but I had always managed to brush it off, to tell myself that those people didn't matter, that their opinions didn't define my worth. But in that moment, I felt completely powerless to defend myself or to change the situation. What could I do? Argue with this woman? That would just create a bigger scene and make everyone stare at me even more. Report her to someone? Who would I report her to? And what would I even say? Complain that someone hurt my feelings? It felt childish, weak, like I was the problem for being too sensitive rather than her being the problem for being cruel. So I stood there frozen, wanting to respond but not knowing how, feeling trapped in my own body and my own helplessness. I also felt a deep, crushing loneliness in that moment. Robert had been gone for 5 years, but I missed him more acutely in that moment than I had in months. He would have known what to do. He would have defended me, stood up to that woman, made her apologize. He always made me feel protected, safe, valued. Without him, I felt exposed and vulnerable in a way that went beyond just this incident. I was alone in this big city, alone on this ferry full of strangers, alone in a world that seemed increasingly hostile to women like me. The loneliness wrapped around me like a cold, heavy blanket, making it hard to breathe, hard to think, hard to remember why I had thought taking this trip alone was a good idea in the first place. As the initial shock began to wear off, anger started to rise up beneath the shame. I was angry at that woman for being so needlessly cruel. I was angry at her friends for laughing along instead of stopping her. I was angry at the other passengers who were recording on their phones, turning my humiliation into entertainment for social media. But mostly I was angry at myself. Angry for all the times I had accepted this kind of treatment without fighting back. Angry for all the apologies I had made for taking up space in the world. Angry for all the ways I had made myself smaller, emotionally, socially, psychologically, to make other people more comfortable. Angry for believing, even for a moment, that I deserved this treatment, that my body made me less worthy of respect and dignity than anyone else on that ferry. The anger felt dangerous, unfamiliar. I wasn't someone who got angry often. I was the peacemaker, the one who smoothed over conflicts and made everyone else feel comfortable. But this anger was different. It was hot and fierce, and it made me want to scream, to rage, to refuse to accept this treatment anymore. It scared me a little, this intensity of emotion, but it also felt like it was waking something up inside me that had been asleep for too long. Something that had been buried under years of conditioning to be nice, to be accommodating, to accept whatever treatment the world gave me with a smile and a joke to diffuse the tension. But I didn't want to smile anymore. I didn't want to make this woman or anyone else comfortable with their cruelty toward me. My mind raced with all the things I wished I could say, all the ways I wanted to defend myself and put this woman in her place. I wanted to tell her about my life, about everything I had survived and accomplished. I wanted to tell her that I was a mother and grandmother, that I had been married to a wonderful man for 40 years, that I had worked hard and contributed to my community and raised good, kind children who would never treat another human being the way she was treating me. I wanted to tell her that my worth as a person had nothing to do with my dress size, that I was intelligent and funny and brave and deserving of respect. But the words stuck in my throat, and all I could do was stand there, trembling with a mixture of shame and rage, while this young woman continued to mock me and record me and turn me into a viral video for strangers to laugh at. But then, as I mentioned before, something shifted. Maybe it was remembering my mother's words about using the stones life throws at you to build something beautiful. Maybe it was thinking about my granddaughter and how disappointed she would be if I let this woman steal my joy and my dignity. Maybe it was the support I saw in the eyes of some of the other passengers, the ones who looked disgusted by the blonde woman's behavior rather than by my body. Maybe it was simply that I had finally had enough, that something inside me snapped and said no more, not today, not ever again. Whatever it was, I felt my spine straighten, my chin lift, and words started forming in my mouth before I could second-guess myself or talk myself out of speaking up. As I stood there on that ferry, gathering my courage to respond to the blonde woman's cruelty, my mind flooded with memories of countless other times when I had been treated as less than human because of my body. It was like opening a filing cabinet in my brain that I had tried to keep locked, and now all the painful memories came tumbling out, one after another, reminding me that this wasn't an isolated incident, but rather the latest in a lifelong pattern of discrimination and disrespect that I had endured simply for existing in a larger body. Each memory cut like a knife, and I realized with startling clarity that I had been carrying the weight of all these experiences with me for my entire life, and it was time to finally let them go. I remembered being 10 years old and shopping for school clothes with my mother. We had gone to the local department store, and I was so excited to pick out a new outfit for the first day of 5th grade. I had my eye on a beautiful blue dress with white flowers that I saw in the window. But when my mother asked the saleswoman if they had it in my size, the woman looked me up and down with obvious disdain and said, "We don't carry sizes for girls like her. You'll have to try the specialty shops for chubby children." My mother's face had turned red with anger, but she didn't say anything. She just took my hand and led me out of the store while I blinked back tears, trying to understand why I couldn't have the same pretty dress as the other girls. That was my first conscious experience of being excluded and othered because of my size, but it would be far from the last. In high school, I tried out for the cheerleading squad. I had been taking gymnastics classes, and I was actually quite athletic and flexible despite my size. I could do splits, cartwheels, back handsprings. But when I showed up for tryouts, the coach took one look at me and said, "Honey, I don't think this is the right activity for you. Have you considered joining the debate team instead? Or maybe working on the school newspaper?" I was heartbroken. I had practiced for weeks, had learned all the routines from watching the cheerleaders at games. But I never even got a chance to show what I could do. The message was clear. Fat girls weren't allowed to be cheerleaders, to be visible, to represent the school in that way. Fat girls were supposed to be invisible, to work behind the scenes, to stay in spaces where their bodies wouldn't offend anyone. When I was pregnant with my first child, Sarah, I went to my first obstetrics appointment excited and nervous. But instead of celebrating with me or addressing my questions about the baby's development, the doctor spent the entire appointment lecturing me about my weight. He told me that I was starting my pregnancy at an unhealthy weight and that I needed to make sure I didn't gain any more than absolutely necessary. He put me on a restrictive diet and warned me about all the terrible things that could happen to my baby if I didn't lose weight. Every single appointment after that was the same: more lectures, more warnings, more judgment. He never asked me how I was feeling, never congratulated me on the new life I was creating. All he could see was my fat, and all he could talk about was how my body was a problem that needed to be solved. I ended up having 3 healthy pregnancies and 3 healthy babies, but those experiences taught me that even at my most vulnerable, even when creating life, my body would be seen as wrong, as shameful, as something that needed to be fixed. I remembered going to a job interview when I was in my 30s, applying for a management position at a company where I had been working in an administrative role for several years. I was qualified for the position, possibly overqualified, and several of my colleagues had encouraged me to apply. But during the interview, the hiring manager, a thin, impeccably dressed woman about my age, barely asked me any questions about my skills or experience. Instead, she talked about how the position required someone who could present a professional image and who would feel comfortable representing the company at high-level meetings and events. She asked me if I owned appropriate professional attire and whether I was comfortable with public speaking and being in the spotlight. I got the message loud and clear. Someone who looked like me couldn't possibly represent the company professionally. The position went to a younger, thinner woman with less experience and fewer qualifications. I stayed in my administrative role for another 5 years before finally leaving the company. There was the time Robert and I tried to book a table at a fancy restaurant for our 20th wedding anniversary. When we arrived for our reservation, we were seated at a table in the back corner, near the kitchen and the bathrooms, even though I could see plenty of empty tables in the main dining room with the windows and the ambience. When I asked if we could sit at one of those tables instead, the host looked uncomfortable and said, "This is the table we have available for your party." It was clear that they had deliberately given us the worst table in the restaurant, hidden away where other diners wouldn't have to look at us, or more specifically, at me. Robert was furious and wanted to leave, but I convinced him to stay because I didn't want our special evening to be ruined. We ate our expensive meal in that cramped, noisy corner, and I tried to pretend it didn't bother me, but it did. It absolutely did. I remembered going to my high school reunion 10 years ago. I had been looking forward to it, eager to reconnect with old friends and catch up on their lives. But within the first hour, 3 different people I had considered friends in school, asked me if I had tried various diets or weight loss programs. One former friend even pulled me aside, put her hand on my arm in this condescending way, and said, "You know, Maggie, you were always so pretty. If you just lost some weight, you could be beautiful again. It's not too late. My sister did this great program and lost 70 pounds. I could give you her number." I was stunned. I hadn't seen this woman in 20 years. And this was what she wanted to talk about? Not my children, not my job, not my life, just my weight and how I should fix it. I left the reunion early and never went to another one. Then there were the countless airline experiences. Oh, the airline experiences. Every time I had to fly, which thankfully wasn't often, I dreaded the moment when I would walk down the aisle and see the passenger who would be sitting next to me look up, see my size, and their face would fall. I could read their thoughts so clearly. Oh no, I'm going to have to sit next to a fat person. I would try to make myself as small as possible, folding in my arms, leaning toward the window or the aisle, barely breathing for the entire flight, so I wouldn't take up more space than absolutely necessary. Flight attendants would sometimes ask me, loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear, if I had purchased 2 seats or if I would need a seatbelt extender. The humiliation of having to ask for an extender, of having everyone around me know that I couldn't fit in the standard seat, was excruciating. I stopped flying altogether for several years because it was just too painful. I remembered countless shopping experiences where salespeople followed me around the store suspiciously, as if they expected me to steal something or damage their merchandise. Or stores where they simply didn't carry my size at all, making me feel like I didn't even deserve to participate in the basic human activity of buying clothes. I would stand outside stores in the mall, looking at the beautiful clothes in the windows, knowing before I even walked in that nothing would fit me. And on the rare occasions when I did find stores that carried plus sizes, the clothes were always hidden in the back, in a separate section labeled women's, or extended sizes, as if we weren't real women, as if we needed to be segregated from the regular customers. The styles were usually dowdy and matronly, designed to hide our bodies rather than celebrate them. The message was clear. You can buy clothes here, but we're not happy about it, and we're certainly not going to make you feel good about yourself while you're doing it. There were the medical experiences beyond just my pregnancies. Every doctor's appointment, regardless of the reason I was there, always came back to my weight. Sore throat. Lose weight. Sprained ankle? Lose weight. Depression after Robert died? Lose weight. It didn't matter what my actual health concern was. The solution was always the same. Doctors rarely listened to my actual symptoms or concerns because they were too focused on my body size. One time I went to the emergency room with severe chest pain. Instead of immediately running tests to rule out a heart attack, the ER doctor spent 15 minutes lecturing me about my weight and diet while I was in pain and terrified that I might be dying. It turned out I had severe acid reflux, which was treatable, but I could have died while that doctor wasted time judging me instead of treating me. After experiences like that, I stopped going to the doctor unless it was absolutely unavoidable. Why would I put myself through that judgment and humiliation if I didn't absolutely have to? Standing there on that ferry, with all these painful memories flooding through me and the blonde woman still smirking at me while recording on her phone, something fundamentally shifted inside me. It was like all those decades of accepting mistreatment, of apologizing for my existence, of making myself smaller to accommodate other people's prejudices, crystallized into a single moment of absolute clarity. I realized that I had a choice. I could do what I had always done, shrink away, internalize the shame, let this woman's cruelty define my experience and ruin this trip that my beloved granddaughter had given me. Or I could do something different. I could stand up for myself. I could refuse to accept this treatment. I could use my voice, even though it was shaking, even though I was terrified, even though every instinct told me to just be quiet and avoid making a scene. The thought of speaking up terrified me. I wasn't someone who liked conflict or confrontation. I was the woman who apologized when other people bumped into me. I was the woman who always tried to smooth things over, to make everyone comfortable, to avoid making waves. The idea of deliberately creating a confrontation, of drawing even more attention to myself, went against every fiber of my being. My heart was racing, my palms were sweating, and my inner voice was screaming at me to just let it go, to go stand somewhere else on the ferry, to cry quietly in a corner, and then put on a brave face and pretend this hadn't happened. That's what I would have done at any other point in my life. That's what I had been conditioned to do for 63 years. But I thought about Emma, my beautiful, fierce, loving granddaughter who had scraped together money from her minimum wage job to give me this experience. She had told me she wanted me to feel free, to have adventures, to take up space in the world unapologetically. She had said I was the strongest woman she knew. What would I be teaching her if I let this happen without standing up for myself? What message would I be sending about how women like us should accept being treated? Emma was watching me, even though she wasn't physically there. My other grandchildren were watching me. My children were watching me. They would ask me about this trip, and I would have to decide whether to tell them the truth about what happened or to lie and pretend everything was perfect. Did I want to model surrender or resistance? Did I want to teach them to accept abuse or to fight against it? I thought about Robert, too, my dear husband who had seen me as beautiful every single day of our 40 years together, who had made me feel worthy and valuable and desirable even when the rest of the world told me I was none of those things. Robert never would have let someone treat me this way without saying something. He would have been furious. He would have defended me passionately. But Robert was gone, and I couldn't rely on him to protect me anymore. I had to learn to protect myself. I had to be my own advocate, my own defender, my own champion. The thought was both terrifying and strangely empowering. Maybe this was what moving forward without him looked like, finding the courage he had always seen in me, but that I had never fully believed I possessed. I looked around at the other passengers on the ferry. Most of them were still staring, waiting to see what would happen next. Some looked sympathetic, others uncomfortable, a few seemed entertained by the drama. But several people were looking at me with something that resembled expectation, even encouragement. One older woman gave me a small nod, as if urging me to speak. A young man who had been taking photos of the statue had lowered his camera and was watching with an intense, focused expression. Even some of the blonde woman's friends were starting to look uncomfortable, as if they were beginning to realize that this had gone too far. These strangers were witnesses. They would remember this moment. They would tell this story to other people. Did I want them to remember me as the pathetic fat old lady who took the abuse silently, or did I want them to remember something different? I realized that this wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about this one incident on this one ferry on this one day. This was about every woman who had ever been made to feel ashamed of her body. This was about every fat person who had been treated as less than human, who had been mocked and discriminated against and told they didn't deserve to exist in public spaces. This was about standing up not just for myself, but for all of us. If I stayed silent, I would be complicit in my own dehumanization. I would be agreeing that what this woman was saying and doing was acceptable. I would be teaching her and everyone watching that fat people will accept abuse without protest, that we don't believe we deserve better treatment, that we agree with the negative judgments society makes about our bodies. The anger that had been simmering beneath my shame suddenly surged to the surface, hot and fierce and clarifying. I was angry, genuinely, righteously angry, and for the first time in my life, I decided that my anger was justified and that I had every right to express it. I was angry at this cruel woman, yes, but I was also angry at every person who had ever made me feel less than. I was angry at a society that told women their value was determined by their appearance, that treated fat people as acceptable targets for public ridicule and discrimination. I was angry at myself for all the times I had accepted this treatment, for all the times I had apologized for taking up space, for all the times I had believed the lie that my body made me unworthy of respect and dignity. But beneath the anger was something even more powerful, a determination I hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. A bone-deep conviction that I was done apologizing, done shrinking, done accepting cruelty as if it were my due. I was done living my life, trying to make other people comfortable with my existence. I was done prioritizing everyone else's feelings over my own dignity. I was done being invisible when I wanted to be seen, being silent when I had something to say, being small when I deserved to take up as much space as anyone else. This woman had picked the wrong day and the wrong person to attack. She had pushed me to a breaking point I didn't even know I had, and there was no going back from this moment. Whatever happened next, I knew I would never be the same person I was before stepping onto this ferry. I took a deep breath, feeling the salt air fill my lungs, and I made a decision that would change the trajectory of my entire life. I decided to speak. Not quietly, not apologetically, not trying to defuse the situation or make everyone comfortable. I decided to speak loudly, clearly, firmly. I decided to claim my right to exist in this space, to enjoy this experience, to be treated with basic human dignity. My voice was shaking when I started to speak, but it grew stronger with each word, fueled by 6 decades of accumulated pain and a newly discovered well of courage I didn't know I possessed. I looked that blonde woman directly in her eyes, and I said words that I had never said before to anyone who had mistreated me. And everything changed. The decision to speak, to stand up for myself in that moment, was terrifying but also strangely exhilarating. I could feel my whole body trembling, adrenaline coursing through my veins, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. But I also felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. It was as if I had been sleepwalking through my life, accepting whatever came my way, and suddenly I had woken up and decided to actively participate in my own existence. This was my life, my experience, my moment, and I wasn't going to let this cruel stranger take it away from me. Not without a fight, not without using my voice, not without standing up for myself and for every person who had ever been made to feel the way I had been made to feel. "Excuse me," I said, my voice starting soft but growing firmer with each syllable, "but I paid for my ticket just like everyone else here. I have every right to be on this ferry and to enjoy this experience. Your comments are hurtful, disrespectful, and completely unnecessary. I am a human being who deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of my size or age." The words came out of my mouth before I could second-guess them, before I could talk myself out of speaking, before fear could silence me the way it had silenced me so many times before. And once I started speaking, I couldn't stop. It was like opening a dam that had been holding back decades of pain and frustration. The blonde woman's smirk faltered slightly. She clearly hadn't expected me to respond, hadn't expected me to stand up for myself. In her experience, fat people probably just took the abuse silently, confirming her belief that we somehow deserved it or accepted it. But I wasn't going to be silent anymore. "I am a mother and a grandmother," I continued, my voice growing even stronger. "I worked hard my entire life. I volunteered in my community. I raised good, kind children who would never dream of treating another human being the way you're treating me. My granddaughter saved money from her part-time job to give me this trip because she wanted me to have adventures and make memories. And you are trying to take that away from me with your cruelty." The blonde woman opened her mouth as if to say something, but before she could speak, other passengers started joining in. The older gentleman I mentioned before stepped forward and said, "Young lady, you should be absolutely ashamed of yourself. This woman has done nothing to you, and your behavior is disgraceful. Where are your manners? Where is your compassion? I didn't serve in Vietnam and fight for this country, so that people like you could treat fellow Americans with such contempt." His voice was firm and authoritative, the voice of someone used to being listened to. The blonde woman looked taken aback, her confidence visibly shaking. A mother holding the hand of a little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, spoke up next. "I don't want my daughter to witness this kind of bullying," she said, her voice sharp with disapproval. "You need to stop immediately. You're teaching my child that it's okay to be cruel to people who look different, and that is not a lesson I want her to learn." The little girl was looking up at her mother with wide eyes, then looked at me with such innocent sympathy that it made my heart ache. That child would remember this moment, and I was suddenly grateful that she would see me standing up for myself rather than accepting abuse silently. A middle-aged couple who had been taking romantic photos together turned their attention to the situation. The woman pulled out her phone and started recording, saying in a loud, clear voice, "We're documenting this too, and if you don't apologize to this woman right now, we're going to make sure this video goes viral and everyone sees what kind of person you really are. The internet doesn't take kindly to bullies, and you've picked on the wrong person." Her husband nodded vigorously and added, "Yeah, you want to be famous? We'll make you famous. Let's see how your employer feels about this behavior. Let's see how your family feels about it." More people started speaking up. A young man with a backpack said, "This is disgusting. I came to America to visit the Statue of Liberty to see the symbol of freedom and equality, and instead I'm watching someone be treated like this? This is not the America I dreamed about." His accent suggested he was European, maybe German or Dutch. An elderly black woman said, "Baby, don't you let them make you feel bad. I've dealt with discrimination my whole life, and I know what it feels like. You hold your head up high. You belong here just as much as anyone." Her words brought tears to my eyes, this stranger offering solidarity and support. Even some of the blonde woman's friends started to distance themselves from her. One of them, a young woman with dark hair, quietly said, "Sarah, that's enough. You're taking this too far." Another one, looking uncomfortable, put her phone away and moved to stand farther away from the group. They were beginning to realize that they were on the wrong side of this situation, that they had gone from being observers to being accomplices, and that they too might face consequences for their association with this behavior. The blonde woman, Sarah apparently, looked around at the growing tide of opposition, and her smirk completely disappeared, replaced by a look of panic. But Sarah wasn't ready to back down completely. "Oh, please," she said, her voice defensive now rather than mocking. "I was just joking around. Can't anyone take a joke anymore? Everyone's so sensitive these days." It was the predictable response of a bully who suddenly finds herself outnumbered. Claim it was all a joke, blame the victim for being too sensitive, try to make everyone else feel like they're overreacting. But no one was buying it. The older gentleman said, "That was no joke, young lady. That was deliberate cruelty, and you know it." The mother with the little girl added, "Jokes are supposed to be funny. That was just mean." I found my voice again, surprising myself with my own boldness. "You weren't joking," I said, looking directly at Sarah. "You were deliberately trying to humiliate me in front of all these people. You recorded me on your phone to share with your social media followers, so they could laugh at me too. That's not a joke, that's bullying. And I want you to know that it didn't work. You didn't ruin my day. You didn't make me feel ashamed of who I am. All you did was show everyone here what kind of person you are, and it's not a good look." My hands had stopped shaking. My voice was steady. I felt powerful in a way I had never felt before. A man in a ferry staff uniform had noticed the commotion and approached our area. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, looking between me and Sarah with a concerned expression. Multiple passengers immediately started talking at once, explaining what had happened. The mother with the daughter said, "This young woman has been verbally harassing this older woman, calling her names, recording her without consent, making a huge scene." The older gentleman added, "It's been extremely inappropriate and disturbing. She's created a hostile environment on this ferry." The couple who had been recording on their phone offered, "We have the whole thing on video if you need evidence." Sarah's face went pale as she realized this situation was escalating beyond her control. "Wait, no, this is ridiculous," she protested. "I didn't do anything wrong. She's just..." But the ferry staff member held up his hand to stop her. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification, and I'm going to need you and your friends to come with me. We have a zero-tolerance policy for harassment on these ferries, especially harassment based on someone's appearance or protected characteristics. There will be consequences for this behavior." Sarah looked stunned, as if she genuinely couldn't believe there would be actual repercussions for her actions. "And you plus-size woman who is watching? Have you ever been through something similar? Share in the comments and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more empowerment stories." As I watched the ferry staff member lead Sarah and her friends away, with Sarah protesting loudly that this was all blown out of proportion and not fair, I felt something shift fundamentally inside me. My legs were still shaking, my heart was still pounding, but there was a new sensation flooding through my body, a sense of power, of agency, of my own worth that I had never fully experienced before. I had used my voice. I had stood up for myself. I had refused to accept mistreatment. And the world hadn't ended. In fact, people had supported me. Strangers had defended me. Justice was actually being served, at least in this small moment on this ferry in New York Harbor. Several passengers came over to check on me. The elderly black woman who had spoken earlier put her hand on my arm and said, "You did good, honey. Real good. I know that wasn't easy, but you stood up for yourself and that took courage." Her kindness made tears spring to my eyes, but they were different tears than the ones I had been fighting back during the harassment. These were tears of relief, of gratitude, of overwhelming emotion from being seen and supported. "Thank you," I managed to say. "Thank you so much for speaking up. I don't think I could have gotten through that without everyone's support." The older gentleman who had first defended me introduced himself as Frank, a retired Army colonel. "Young lady," he said, and I almost laughed at being called young lady at 63. "You showed real backbone back there. That girl needed to learn that actions have consequences, and you helped teach her that lesson. I'm proud of you." His approval meant something to me, this stranger who had stood up for me without even knowing me. "I'm just sorry you had to experience that in the first place," he continued. "This country is supposed to be better than that. We're supposed to treat each other with respect and dignity. I hope the rest of your visit is much more pleasant. The mother with the little girl approached, and the child was holding something. A small stuffed Statue of Liberty toy that she must have bought at the gift shop before boarding. I want you to have this, the little girl said shyly, holding out the toy to me. My mommy said you're very brave. I was so touched I could barely speak. I knelt down to the child's level, ignoring the protest from my knees, and accepted the gift. Thank you, sweetheart, I said. That's so kind of you. You know what? You're brave too for speaking up when you see something wrong. Your mommy is teaching you good lessons. The mother smiled at me with tears in her own eyes and mouthed, thank you. As the ferry continued its journey toward Liberty Island, I found a bench to sit on, still processing everything that had just happened. My hands were wrapped around the little stuffed Lady Liberty, and I stared at it, thinking about what it represented: freedom, dignity, the right to exist and be treated fairly regardless of who you are or where you come from. My own ancestors had come to America seeking those very things, fleeing poverty and discrimination in Ireland to build new lives in a country that promised equal opportunity. And here I was, their granddaughter, having just claimed my own freedom and dignity in a small but significant way. Other passengers kept coming by to offer words of support and encouragement. A young woman about Emma's age said, "That was amazing what you did. I'm plus size too, and I deal with comments and judgment all the time. I usually just stay quiet because I'm afraid of making things worse or drawing more attention to myself. But watching you stand up for yourself made me realize that we don't have to accept that treatment. Thank you for being brave enough to speak up." Her words hit me hard because I realized that my action hadn't just been about me. It had been witnessed by dozens of people who would carry this story with them, who might be inspired to stand up for themselves or others in the future. An elderly man with a thick Italian accent squeezed my shoulder gently and said, "My wife, she was a big woman. Beautiful, strong, the love of my life. She passed away 2 years ago, and one of my biggest regrets is that I didn't always defend her when people made comments about her size. I should have been braver. You did what I failed to do. You stood up and refused to accept disrespect. Your husband, if you have one, must be very proud." I told him about Robert, about how he had passed away 5 years ago, about how he had always made me feel beautiful. "He would be proud of you today," the Italian man said with certainty. "Very proud." As the ferry approached Liberty Island and the statue grew larger and larger before us, I felt something opening up inside me, a sense of possibility, of potential, of a future that might look different from the past. For 63 years, I had accepted a certain narrative about myself and my place in the world. I had believed, on some level, that my size made me less worthy of respect, less deserving of dignity, less entitled to take up space and have adventures and live fully. I had internalized society's messages about fat bodies, about aging women, about who mattered and who didn't. But in standing up for myself on that ferry, I had challenged that narrative. I had declared that I did matter, that I did deserve respect, that I wouldn't accept being treated as less than. At the cafe on the island, I ordered lunch without the usual guilt and anxiety I felt about eating in public. I didn't order the smallest thing on the menu or make excuses about being hungry. I ordered what I actually wanted, a sandwich, chips, and a soda, and I sat at an outdoor table in full view of everyone and I ate my meal without shame. Nobody stared at me. Nobody commented on my food choices. Nobody seemed to care at all what I was eating. The judgmental voices were in my head, not in the world around me, or at least, not always in the world around me. And I was starting to realize that I didn't have to listen to those internal voices anymore. I could choose different thoughts, kinder thoughts, truer thoughts. After lunch, I found a bench with a perfect view of Lady Liberty, and I sat there for a long time, just thinking and feeling and processing everything that had happened that morning. I thought about how close I had come to letting Sarah's cruelty ruin this entire experience. I thought about how many times in my life I had let other people's judgments and criticisms define my reality, limit my experiences, make me smaller. I thought about how much time I had wasted hating my body instead of appreciating it, apologizing for my existence instead of celebrating it, hiding from life instead of fully living it. And I made another promise to myself. That was going to change starting now. I pulled out my phone and, for the first time ever, I called my granddaughter Emma while I was on the trip instead of waiting until I got home. When she answered, I could hear the excitement in her voice. "Grandma, how is it? Are you having the best time?" And instead of glossing over what had happened, instead of pretending everything was perfect, I told her the truth. I told her about Sarah's harassment, about standing up for myself, about the other passengers supporting me, about how something had shifted inside me. I told her I was sitting on Liberty Island feeling more free than I had felt in my entire life. Emma was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Grandma, I'm so sorry that happened to you, but I'm also so incredibly proud of you for standing up for yourself. That's exactly why I wanted you to take this trip. Not so you could be harassed, obviously, but so you could have experiences that remind you how strong and amazing you are. You deserve to have adventures. You deserve to take up space. You deserve to be treated with respect. And I'm so glad you're finally starting to believe that." We talked for 20 more minutes, and by the time we hung up, I was crying. But they were good tears, healing tears, tears of love and gratitude and newfound determination to live differently. The ferry ride back to Manhattan that afternoon was completely different from the morning journey. Sarah and her friends weren't on the boat. They had been banned from boarding and would have to find their own way back to the city. I felt vindicated but also slightly guilty, worrying that maybe I had overreacted, that maybe I had been too harsh. But then I reminded myself of what Sarah had said and done, how deliberately cruel she had been, and I pushed that guilt away. She had faced consequences for her actions, and that was appropriate and necessary. I didn't need to feel bad about that. Several passengers from the morning ferry, who were also heading back, recognized me and came over to chat. Frank, the retired colonel, sat with me and we talked about his experiences with discrimination in the military, about how he had learned to stand up for himself and for others who were being mistreated. "The thing is," he said, "bullies rely on their victims staying silent. They rely on bystanders not getting involved. When you spoke up, and when the rest of us supported you, we broke that cycle. That woman learned today that her behavior won't be tolerated, and everyone else on that ferry learned that it's important to speak up when you witness injustice. You started something important today, Maggie." His words made me think about the broader impact of what had happened. I had been so focused on my own experience, on my own pain and eventual empowerment, that I hadn't fully considered how it might have affected others. But he was right. There had probably been other fat people on that ferry, other people who had experienced similar harassment, other people who had stayed silent out of fear or shame. Maybe seeing me stand up for myself had given them courage. Maybe the thin people on the ferry who witnessed it would think twice before making comments about someone's body in the future. Maybe parents would have conversations with their children about treating everyone with kindness and respect. Maybe something did shift, at least in some small way. When I got back to my hotel that evening, I was exhausted, emotionally drained from the intensity of the day, physically tired from all the walking and stair climbing. But instead of immediately collapsing into bed like I normally would have, I did something different. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my hotel room, something I usually avoided doing. I looked at my body, really looked at it, without the automatic criticism and judgment that usually accompanied such moments. I saw my round stomach, my thick thighs, my soft arms, my double chin. But I also saw strength. I saw a body that had carried 3 babies. I saw arms that had hugged my children and grandchildren thousands of times. I saw legs that had climbed the Statue of Liberty stairs. I saw a survivor. I took a selfie in that mirror, just for me, documentation of this moment of acceptance and appreciation for my body. I looked at the photo and instead of immediately deleting it like I usually did, I saved it. And then, feeling bold and reckless and free, I posted it on my Facebook page with a caption about my day at the Statue of Liberty, about facing harassment but standing up for myself, about learning to claim space in the world. I didn't go into all the details, I kept it relatively brief, but I was honest about what had happened and how it had affected me. Then I put my phone down before I could second-guess myself and delete the post. Within an hour, my phone was blowing up with notifications. My children, my siblings, my friends, my coworkers, current and former, my neighbors, people I had gone to high school with, people I hadn't talked to in years. They were all commenting, messaging, calling. The overwhelming majority of responses were supportive, encouraging, celebrating my courage. My daughter Sarah, not to be confused with the blonde Sarah from the ferry, called me crying, saying she was so proud of me and that she wished she had known I had been dealing with these kinds of experiences my whole life. My son Michael sent a long message about how I had always taught him to stand up for what was right, and he was glad to see me doing that for myself. My daughter Jennifer posted a public comment calling me her hero. But there were also a few negative responses. One of my distant cousins commented that I should have just ignored the rude girl and not made such a big deal out of it, that making a scene was unbecoming. A former coworker suggested that maybe if I focused on losing weight, I wouldn't face these kinds of situations. An old friend from church said she was praying for me to find the discipline to get healthier. These comments stung, reminding me that not everyone would support this new version of me who refused to accept mistreatment quietly. But instead of internalizing the criticism like I always had before, I felt anger. Who were these people to judge me, to tell me how I should have handled being publicly humiliated, to suggest that the solution to harassment was for me to change my body rather than for people to change their behavior? I responded to the negative comments calmly but firmly. To my cousin, I wrote, "Making a scene? I was defending my basic human dignity. That's never unbecoming." To the former coworker, I wrote, "My weight is not an invitation for harassment or disrespect. No body size deserves to be treated cruelly." To the church friend, I wrote, "My health is between me and my doctor. What I need is respect, not unsolicited advice." And then I did something I had never done before. I started deleting and blocking people who continued to be negative or judgmental. I was creating boundaries, protecting my peace, refusing to allow toxic people to have access to me just because we were connected on social media. It felt powerful and right and long overdue. The next day, I had plans to visit the Metropolitan Museum of Art. As I was getting ready in my hotel room, I found myself hesitating about what to wear. My instinct was to choose something loose and dark, something that would help me blend in and hopefully be ignored. But then I remembered standing up for myself on the ferry, remembered the sense of freedom and power I had felt. I looked through the clothes I had packed and pulled out a dress I had almost left at home. A bright blue shirt dress with white polka dots that I loved but rarely wore because it felt too attention-grabbing, too visible. I put it on, looked at myself in the mirror, and made a decision. I was wearing this dress. I was going to be visible. I was going to take up space. And if anyone had a problem with that, it was their problem, not mine. Walking through the streets of Manhattan in my bright blue dress felt like a revolutionary act. I wasn't trying to disappear into the crowds. I wasn't apologizing with my body language or my clothing choices. I was just existing, visibly and unapologetically. And you know what? Most people didn't even notice me. They were too busy with their own lives, their own thoughts, their own experiences. The judgment and criticism I had been so afraid of mostly existed in my own head, a lifetime of internalized fat phobia that I was now actively working to dismantle. At the Metropolitan Museum, I spent hours wandering through galleries looking at art, reading about history, sitting on benches when I needed to rest without feeling like I had to justify why I was sitting. In the modern art section, I came across an exhibit featuring photographs of diverse bodies: fat bodies, disabled bodies, old bodies, scarred bodies, bodies that society typically hides away or treats as less beautiful than thin, young, able bodies. I stood in front of those photographs for a long time, tears streaming down my face, feeling seen and validated in a way I never had before. These artists were saying that all bodies are worthy of being looked at, appreciated, celebrated. All bodies tell stories. All bodies have value. A young woman standing next to me at the exhibit noticed my tears and quietly asked if I was okay. Instead of brushing it off or making a joke to deflect, I told her the truth. These photos are just really moving to me. I've spent most of my life feeling ashamed of my body, and seeing bodies like mine treated as worthy of art, worthy of celebration, is incredibly powerful. The young woman nodded and said, "I understand. I'm a photography student, and I'm actually working on a similar project about body diversity. Would you be willing to let me interview you about your experiences? I'm collecting stories from women about their relationships with their bodies and with society's expectations." I hesitated for a moment, my old instinct to stay invisible, to not draw attention, to keep my experiences private. But then I thought about what Frank had said on the ferry, about how speaking up can break cycles and create change. "Yes," I told her. "I would be willing to do that." We exchanged contact information, and she told me she would reach out to set up a time to talk. As we parted ways, I realized I had just agreed to share my story more publicly, to be even more visible, to potentially help other women who were struggling with the same issues. It was terrifying, but it also felt right, like I was stepping into a purpose I hadn't known I was seeking. If you believe that obese women can achieve anything, subscribe to the channel and share this video with a friend who needs to feel empowered. That evening, back in my hotel room, I found myself reflecting on my relationship with my own body and my own worth in ways I never had before. For 63 years, I had carried around beliefs about myself that I had absorbed from society, from media, from casual comments and deliberate cruelty, from well-meaning family members and doctors who thought they were helping. I believed that my worth was tied to my appearance, that my size made me less valuable as a human being, that I owed the world an apology for taking up space, that I should spend my life trying to become smaller in every possible way. But what if all of that was wrong? What if those beliefs were lies? I had been told so many times that I accepted them as truth without ever questioning them. What if my body, exactly as it was not the problem? What if the problem was a society that had incredibly narrow definitions of which bodies were acceptable, valuable, worthy of respect? What if I had wasted decades of my precious life hating myself for no good reason? The thought made me angry and sad in equal measure, but it also filled me with a fierce determination to not waste whatever time I had left. I opened my laptop and started writing, something I hadn't done since high school English classes. I wrote about my experiences, about the pain of being treated as less than, about the moment on the ferry when something shifted inside me, about the slow awakening to my own worth that was happening in real time. The words poured out of me, unfiltered and raw, and I cried as I typed, releasing decades of accumulated pain and shame. I wrote for over 2 hours, and when I finally stopped, I had created something that felt important, something that told my truth in a way I had never allowed myself to do before. I reread what I had written, expecting to feel embarrassed or want to delete it all. But instead, I felt proud. This was my story. This was my truth. These were my experiences, and they mattered. I decided to post excerpts on my Facebook page, continuing the conversation I had started with my previous post. I wrote about body acceptance, about standing up to harassment, about learning to value yourself even when society tells you that you shouldn't. I hit post before I could talk myself out of it, and then I closed my laptop and went to bed, exhausted but feeling more authentic than I had in my entire life. The next morning, I woke up to hundreds of messages. Women, mostly women, but some men too, had commented on my posts and sent private messages sharing their own stories. Fat women who had experienced similar harassment. Thin women who thanked me for speaking up because they realized they had been complicit in fat phobia by staying silent when they witnessed it. Mothers who said my posts had made them think about how they talked about bodies around their daughters. Teachers who said they were going to use my story to talk with students about bullying and respect. Men who admitted they had made jokes about fat women and were now reconsidering their behavior. The response was overwhelming and humbling. One message in particular stuck with me. It was from a woman named Patricia who lived in Ohio, not far from where I grew up. She wrote, "I am 67 years old and I have been fat my entire life. I have hidden, apologized, shrunk myself, hated myself, and accepted abuse as if it were my due for the crime of being fat. I have never, not once in my entire life, stood up for myself the way you did on that ferry. Reading your story made me cry for hours. Crying for you, crying for myself, crying for all of us who have been taught that we don't deserve dignity and respect. But I'm done crying now. I'm done accepting this. You inspired me to change, and I want you to know that. You made a difference in my life, and I'm sure in many other lives too. Thank you for being brave." I read Patricia's message over and over, tears streaming down my face. I had made a difference. My story, my pain, my decision to stand up for myself, it had meaning beyond just my own experience. It had touched someone else, maybe many someone else's, and potentially changed the trajectory of their lives. The realization was both humbling and empowering. I wrote back to Patricia, and we ended up having a long email exchange about our experiences, about our plans to live differently going forward, about supporting each other in this journey of self-acceptance and demanding respect. By the end of our conversation, I felt like I had made a real friend, a sister in arms, someone who truly understood. I spent the rest of that day in New York visiting other sites on my list, the 9/11 Memorial, Brooklyn Bridge, Central Park. But everywhere I went, I carried myself differently than I had before the ferry incident. I walked with my head up, my shoulders back, making eye contact with people instead of looking down. I smiled at strangers without waiting to see if they would smile first. I asked questions when I was curious about something instead of staying silent to avoid drawing attention. I took photos of myself at each location, documenting my presence, my experience, my right to exist in these spaces. Each photo felt like an act of rebellion, a refusal to remain invisible. At the 9/11 Memorial, I struck up a conversation with another woman who was visiting alone. Her name was Judith, and she was in her 50s, also a widow, also plus size. We bonded immediately over our shared experiences, And she told me about how she had stopped traveling after her husband died because she was afraid to navigate airports and unfamiliar places alone in her body. "People aren't kind to fat women traveling alone," she said quietly. "I just got tired of the judgment, the comments, the way people look at you like you're taking up too much space or don't belong there." I told her about what had happened on the ferry and about how something had changed for me in that moment. "I realized that I can't control how other people treat me," I said. "I can't stop every cruel person from being cruel, but I can control how I respond. I can refuse to accept it silently. I can stand up for myself. I can demand the respect I deserve. And you know what? Most people actually are decent. Most people will support you if you're being treated badly. The cruel ones are actually the minority, even though they seem so loud and overwhelming." Judith listened intently, and when I finished, she said, "I needed to hear that. I've been planning a trip to visit my daughter in California, but I keep making excuses not to go because I'm afraid of flying, afraid of being judged, afraid of taking up too much space on the plane. But you're right. I can't let fear and other people's potential judgments keep me from living my life. My daughter needs me. I need to see my grandchildren. I'm going to book that ticket today." We exchanged phone numbers and email addresses, promising to stay in touch and support each other. As we parted ways, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for reminding me that I'm brave enough to do this." Later that afternoon, I decided to do something I had never done before. I went shopping for clothes, not in plus-size specialty stores or online where I usually shopped, but in regular Manhattan boutiques. I was tired of being relegated to the back sections or separate stores, tired of being made to feel like my body was too wrong to deserve beautiful clothes. I walked into a trendy boutique in Soho, and when a saleswoman approached me with what looked like it might be a dismissive attitude, I spoke before she could. "Hello, I'm looking for a dress, something bold and colorful, in a size 24. Do you carry that size?" The saleswoman looked surprised, then recovered quickly. "We do carry some larger sizes, though our selection might be limited. Let me see what we have." She brought out several dresses, and while the selection was indeed limited, there were a few options. I tried them on, and when I came out of the dressing room to look in the mirror, I didn't automatically criticize what I saw. I looked at the colors, the fit, how the dress made me feel. I chose a gorgeous emerald green wrap dress that made me feel confident and beautiful, and I bought it without guilt or apology. As the saleswoman was ringing up my purchase, she said, "You know, we should carry more sizes. I'm going to bring it up with the owner. We're missing out on customers like you." It was a small comment, but it felt significant. Maybe by simply showing up, by refusing to be invisible, by demanding to be served and respected, I was contributing to change in some small way. Maybe every fat woman who walked into spaces we weren't expected to occupy, who refused to apologize or hide, who spent our money and took up space and existed loudly. Maybe we were collectively pushing society toward greater acceptance and inclusion. That evening, I wore my new green dress to dinner at a nice restaurant I had researched online. I made a reservation for one, and when I arrived, I specifically requested a table in the main dining room with a good view, not tucked away in a corner. The host looked mildly surprised but seated me at a lovely table by the window overlooking the street. I ordered wine, an appetizer, an entree, and dessert, everything I wanted without guilt or justification. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, watching people walk by outside, feeling completely content in my own company. At the next table, a younger couple kept glancing over at me, and I braced myself for judgment or comments. But when the woman caught my eye, she smiled and said, "I'm sorry for staring, but I just have to tell you, that dress is absolutely stunning on you, and I love that you're dining alone so confidently. I always feel self-conscious eating alone in restaurants, but watching you enjoy your meals so unapologetically is inspiring." Her compliment was so genuine and unexpected that I felt tears prick my eyes. "Thank you," I said. "I'm learning that I deserve to take up space and enjoy experiences, even by myself. Especially by myself." After dinner, walking back to my hotel through the streets of Manhattan, I felt transformed. I wasn't a different person than I had been a few days ago when I arrived in New York. I was the same person, but I was finally seeing myself clearly, valuing myself appropriately, claiming the dignity and respect that had always been my right. The ferry incident with Sarah had been painful, but it had also been catalytic, breaking something open inside me that needed to break, allowing me to step into a version of myself that had been buried under layers of shame and self-hatred for too long. I thought about my mother's words that I had carried with me all my life. Life will throw stones at you, but you can either let them break you or use them to build something beautiful. I was finally understanding what she meant. I was taking the stones, all the cruelty, all the discrimination, all the pain, and I was building something beautiful. A life lived with authenticity, courage, and self-love. On my last full day in New York, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. The experiences of the past few days had awakened something in me, and I couldn't go back to Ohio and just resume my regular life as if nothing had changed. Something needed to change. I needed to do something with this energy, this anger, this newfound commitment to self-advocacy and body acceptance. But what? I wasn't sure yet, but I felt certain that clarity would come if I paid attention to what was calling me. I spent the morning walking through Central Park, thinking and processing and planning. I thought about all the responses I had received to my Facebook posts, particularly from other plus-size women who felt invisible, ashamed, discriminated against. I thought about Patricia in Ohio, who said she had never once stood up for herself. I thought about Judith, who had stopped traveling because of fear and shame. I thought about the young photography student who was collecting stories about women's relationships with their bodies. I thought about my own granddaughter Emma, who had given me this trip, who deserved to grow up in a world that treated all bodies with respect and dignity. An idea started forming in my mind, vague at first but growing more concrete as I walked. What if I created some kind of support group or community for plus-size women in my area? A safe space where we could share our experiences, support each other, celebrate our bodies, strategize about dealing with discrimination, and build each other up? I had never organized anything like that before. I was just a grandmother from Ohio, not an activist or a community organizer. But maybe that was exactly why I should do it. Maybe there were other regular women like me who needed this community, who were waiting for someone to create it, who would join if someone just took the first step. I pulled out my phone and started researching. Were there already groups like this in my area? I found a few online communities, but nothing local, nothing that met in person. There were national organizations focused on size acceptance and fat rights, but they seemed distant, abstract, not connected to my everyday life in my small Ohio city. What I envisioned was something grassroots, intimate, practical, women gathering regularly to support each other, share resources, practice standing up for ourselves, and simply exist together without shame or judgment. The more I thought about it, the more excited I became. This could be real. I could make this happen. I found a bench near Bethesda Fountain and spent the next hour on my phone, taking notes, making plans, researching what would be involved in starting a support group. I would need a meeting space. Maybe I could reserve a room at the public library or ask my church if we could use their community room. I would need to get the word out. I could post on local Facebook groups, put up flyers around town, reach out to the women who had messaged me in response to my posts. I would need some kind of structure or purpose for the meetings. Maybe we could have guest speakers sometimes, or do activities together, or simply have discussions about relevant topics. The possibilities felt endless and exciting. I also started thinking bigger, beyond just the support group. What else could I do to create change, to make the world a little bit kinder and more inclusive for bodies like mine? I thought about the stores that didn't carry my size, the restaurants that gave me the worst tables, the doctors who focused only on my weight, the airlines with their cramped seats. Individual businesses might not care about my experience, but what if we organized? What if plus-size people collectively made our voices heard, spent our money at businesses that treated us well, and boycotted businesses that discriminated against us? What if we wrote letters, made complaints, shared our experiences publicly until companies realized that fat phobia was bad for business? I remembered what the saleswoman at the boutique had said, that they were missing out on customers by not carrying larger sizes. That was true for so many businesses. Fat people have money to spend, and we deserve to be treated as valued customers. We deserve clothes that fit and are stylish. We deserve restaurant tables with a view. We deserve airplane seats that accommodate our bodies comfortably. We deserve doctors who listen to our concerns instead of blaming everything on our weight. We deserve respect, dignity, and equal treatment. And maybe, by organizing and speaking up collectively, we could start to demand and receive those things. I started drafting a document on my phone outlining these ideas. The support group, the consumer advocacy, the sharing of resources about size-friendly businesses and healthcare providers, the collective action to push for change. As I wrote, I felt more energized and purposeful than I had in the 5 years since Robert died, maybe longer. I had spent so much of my life focused on taking care of others. My husband, my children, my grandchildren, my community through volunteering. This felt like a natural extension of that caregiving impulse, but directed toward a group I was actually part of, toward myself and women like me who desperately needed support and advocacy. By lunchtime, I had filled several phone screens with notes and ideas. I was hungry and excited, and I decided to celebrate this new sense of purpose by going to a restaurant I had been eyeing but felt intimidated by. An upscale bistro with beautiful outdoor seating on a tree-lined street. The old me would have talked myself out of it, convinced I wouldn't fit in or wouldn't be welcomed. But the new me, the me who was still emerging and gaining strength, walked right in and asked for a table outside. The host seated me at a perfect table with a view of the street, brought me a menu, and treated me with the same courtesy he showed every other customer. I ordered a glass of wine and a beautiful lunch, and as I ate, I continued working on my plans, adding ideas, refining concepts, getting more and more excited about what I was going to create when I got home. Other diners occasionally glanced my way, but instead of assuming they were judging me, I chose to believe they were simply people watching as New Yorkers do, or maybe admiring my dress, or maybe not thinking about me at all. After lunch, I did something spontaneous and uncharacteristic. I went to a nearby bookstore and bought several books about body positivity, size acceptance, and fat activism. Authors like Roxane Gay, Lindy West, Sonia Renee Taylor. I had heard of these women, had seen their names mentioned in articles and on social media, but I had never read their work, had never really engaged with the body positivity movement in any serious way. I had been too busy hating my own body to consider that there might be an alternative, a different way of thinking and being. But now I was ready to learn, to immerse myself in these ideas, to educate myself, so I could be more effective in whatever advocacy work I was going to do. As I left the bookstore with my shopping bag full of books, I passed a coffee shop with outdoor seating. A group of young women, probably in their 20s around Emma's age, were sitting at one of the tables, and I overheard part of their conversation. One was talking about a date she had been on, and another asked if she was going to see the guy again. The first woman said, "I don't know, I think he's great, but I need to lose like 10 pounds before I see him again. I can't let him see me like this." Her friends immediately jumped in with reassurances that she looked fine, but also with their own insecurities. "I know what you mean, I've been trying to lose weight too. And have you tried that new diet I sent you?" I stood there for a moment, listening to these beautiful young women tear themselves apart over their bodies, and my heart ached for them. They were so young, with their whole lives ahead of them, and they were already trapped in the same cycle of self-hatred and appearance-focused worth that had consumed so much of my own life. I wanted to go over to them and tell them everything I had learned, everything I was still learning, that their worth had nothing to do with their weight, that they deserved love and respect at any size, that the years they spent hating their bodies were years stolen from really living. But I didn't approach them. I didn't want to be the weird older lady interrupting their conversation with unsolicited advice. Instead, I made another note on my phone. When I started my support group, I wanted to find ways to reach younger women too, to give them the message of body acceptance and self-worth before they spent decades in the prison of self-hatred like I had. Maybe we could do workshops at schools, or partner with college women's groups, or create social media content targeted at younger audiences. The work felt urgent and important, and I was increasingly certain that this was what I needed to do with whatever time I had left in this world. The day I returned home to Ohio, I hit the ground running. I didn't wait, didn't second-guess myself, didn't let the momentum and courage I had built in New York dissipate back into my regular routine. The morning after I got home, I created a Facebook page called Every Body Deserves Respect, a plus-size women's support group. I wrote a description explaining what the group was about, shared my own story from the ferry, and invited women in my area to join for monthly in-person meetings and ongoing online support. I posted about it in several local Facebook groups, and then I sat back and waited nervously to see what would happen. Within 24 hours, 37 women had joined the page. Within a week, that number had grown to over 100. Women were commenting, introducing themselves, sharing their own stories of discrimination and mistreatment. The response was overwhelming and validating. Clearly, I wasn't alone in needing this kind of support and community. Many women thanked me for creating the space. Others shared their relief at finding a community where they didn't have to apologize for their bodies or listen to diet talk. A few shared resources, size-friendly doctors in the area, stores that carried larger sizes, restaurants with comfortable seating. The page was becoming exactly what I had envisioned, and we hadn't even had our first in-person meeting yet. I reached out to my local library about reserving their community room for a monthly meeting, and the librarian was enthusiastic and supportive. She told me they had been looking for more diverse programming and would be happy to host us at no charge. We scheduled our first meeting for 3 weeks out, giving people time to hear about it and plan to attend. I created a Facebook event, and to my amazement, 47 women RSVP'd yes within the first few days. I was excited but also nervous. What if I wasn't a good facilitator? What if people came expecting some kind of expert and found just a regular grandmother who was figuring this out as she went along? But I reminded myself that authenticity was more valuable than expertise, and that I didn't need to have all the answers to create a space where women could support each other. I also reconnected with Patricia, the woman from Ohio who had sent me the emotional message while I was in New York. We met for coffee, and it felt like reuniting with an old friend, even though we had never met before. She was funny, warm, intelligent, and we bonded instantly over our shared experiences. When I told her about the support group I was starting, she offered to help. "I have no idea what I'm doing," I admitted. "I've never organized anything like this before." Patricia laughed and said, "Neither have I, but we can figure it out together. That's what women do, we support each other and figure things out." She became my co-facilitator, and having a partner in this venture made it feel more manageable and less terrifying. The first in-person meeting exceeded all my expectations. 32 women showed up, ranging in age from early 20s to mid-70s, representing diverse backgrounds, professions, and life experiences. The only thing we all had in common was living in larger bodies and dealing with the discrimination, judgment, and mistreatment that came with that. I opened the meeting by sharing my fairy story in more detail than I had online, including how scared I had been to speak up and how transformative that moment had been. Then I invited others to share their experiences if they felt comfortable. One by one, women raised their hands and told their stories. A young woman named Ashley talked about being denied a job promotion because her boss said she didn't have the look they wanted for someone in a client-facing role. A woman named Donna described being told by her doctor that she should lose weight before trying to get pregnant, even though she had no health issues and her weight wasn't medically problematic for pregnancy. A woman named Carol shared how her own mother constantly criticized her size and suggested diets and weight loss programs. A woman named Beverly described the humiliation of being asked to buy 2 airplane seats because she was too large for one. Each story was painful, but there was also power in the telling, in being heard and validated by a room full of women who understood. After the sharing portion, we talked about what we wanted this group to be and do. Some women wanted practical resources, lists of size-friendly businesses, doctors, and services in our area. Some wanted social activities, going out to dinner together, attending events, creating opportunities to exist in public spaces as a group where we could support each other. Some wanted advocacy, collectively contacting businesses that discriminated, writing letters to healthcare providers about better treatment of fat patients, pushing for policy changes in our community. Some just wanted the emotional support of knowing they weren't alone. Patricia and I took notes, promising to incorporate all these ideas into our ongoing meetings and activities. By the end of that first meeting, something beautiful had happened. A room full of strangers had become a community. Women were exchanging phone numbers, making plans to grab lunch together, offering to carpool to future meetings. Several women approached me afterward with tears in their eyes, thanking me for creating this space, saying they had felt so isolated and alone before finding this group. One woman, a teacher in her 40s named Linda, said, "I didn't realize how much I needed this until I walked into this room. For the first time in my life, I don't feel like the biggest person in the room, the one everyone is judging. I just feel normal, accepted, like I belong." Her words made me cry, and we hugged for a long time. Word about the group spread quickly. Local media contacted me asking to do a story about what we were doing. I was hesitant at first. Did I really want my name and face associated with this publicly? What if I faced backlash or criticism? But Patricia encouraged me to do it, pointing out that visibility was important, that other women in other communities might be inspired to start similar groups. So I agreed to an interview with the local newspaper, and they ran a feature article about our group, including quotes from several members about why the community was meaningful to them. The article was overwhelmingly positive, and it brought even more women to our Facebook page and to subsequent meetings. But the article also brought some negative attention. I received several cruel messages on social media from people who said we were promoting obesity and glorifying unhealthy lifestyles. One message said I should be ashamed of myself for encouraging women to stay fat instead of losing weight. Another said our group was a waste of time and we should all just go to the gym instead. The messages stung, triggering all my old insecurities and self-doubt. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was doing something harmful? Maybe I should just shut down the group and go back to being invisible? But then I looked at the messages of support and gratitude from the women in our group. I remembered Linda saying she felt like she belonged for the first time. I remembered Ashley talking about job discrimination and Patricia saying she had never stood up for herself once in 67 years. I remembered the little girl on the ferry giving me her stuffed Statue of Liberty because her mother said I was brave. I reminded myself that our group wasn't promoting obesity. We were promoting respect, dignity, and the radical idea that all human beings deserve to be treated well regardless of their body size. That wasn't shameful. That was essential. And if some people couldn't understand that, it was their problem, not mine. I shared some of the negative messages, with identifying information removed, in our Facebook group, and the response was immediate and fierce. Members rallied to support me, to remind me why this work mattered, to share their own experiences with similar criticism. Several women volunteered to help moderate the Facebook page to block and report people who sent hateful messages. The community that we were building became a shield against the cruelty of those who wanted to tear us down. I realized that this was part of the work too, not just building each other up, but also protecting each other from the people who wanted to keep us small and ashamed. Do you see how a determined overweight woman can change not just her life, but other people's lives? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for more stories like this. As our support group grew and evolved over the following months, I started receiving messages from women outside our immediate area asking if they could start similar groups in their own communities. A woman in Cleveland, a woman in Cincinnati, a woman in Toledo. All of them had seen the newspaper article or heard about our group through word of mouth, and they wanted to create the same kind of supportive community in their cities. I was thrilled and honored that our work was inspiring others, but I also felt a bit overwhelmed. How could I help them? I barely knew what I was doing myself. Patricia suggested we create a simple guide or toolkit that other women could use to start their own groups. Basic information about how to structure meetings, ideas for activities and discussions, tips for creating safe and inclusive spaces, resources about body positivity and size acceptance. We spent several evenings working on this document together, drawing on our own experiences and the feedback we had received from our group members. When we finished, we shared it freely on our Facebook page and offered to answer questions from anyone who wanted to use it. Within weeks, I was aware of at least 7 other similar groups forming in Ohio and neighboring states. One of the women who reached out to me was a young woman named Maria who lived in Michigan. She was 26 years old, and she told me that reading about our group had changed her life. "I'm at the age where all my friends are getting engaged and married," she wrote, "and I've been convinced that no one would ever want me because of my size. I've been on so many diets, had so many failed attempts to lose weight, and I've spent years hating myself and believing I wasn't worthy of love. But reading about your group and seeing older women who have lived full lives in fat bodies, who have been married and had children and careers and adventures, it's like you're showing me that there's a different path, a different way to think about myself and my future. Thank you for that." Maria and I started emailing regularly, and I became something like a mentor to her, though I wasn't entirely comfortable with that label since I was still figuring things out myself. But I shared what I had learned, encouraged her to stand up for herself, reminded her that her worth wasn't determined by her size or whether she was in a relationship. When she successfully stood up to a coworker who made a cruel comment about her weight, she called me to share the news, and I could hear the pride and empowerment in her voice. "I channeled you," she said, laughing. "I thought about you on that ferry, and I found my own courage." My granddaughter Emma became one of our biggest supporters. She attended several of our meetings, even though she wasn't plus-size herself, because she wanted to understand the experiences we were discussing and to be a better ally. She also started talking with her friends about body acceptance and calling out fat-phobic comments when she heard them. One day she told me, "Grandma, watching what you're doing has made me think so much about how I talk about bodies, including my own. I realized I say things like, 'I feel fat,' when I really mean I feel bad about myself. And that's not fair to fat people." I'm learning to separate my feelings from body size, and I'm trying to help my friends do the same. I also started hearing from men, husbands, sons, fathers, brothers of the women in our group, who wanted to understand how to be better supporters. One man, whose wife was a member of our group, sent me a heartfelt message saying, "I love my wife, and I've always thought she was beautiful, but I didn't really understand how much discrimination and pain she experiences because of her size. I didn't know how to help or what to say. Learning about your group and hearing the stories women share has opened my eyes, and I want to be a better husband and ally. Thank you for educating not just women, but also the people who love them." We organized our first group outing. Dinner at a local restaurant that several members had identified as having comfortable seating and treating plus-size customers well. 15 of us went, ranging in age from 23 to 71. We took up several tables in the restaurant, and we laughed and talked and ate without shame or apology. Other diners occasionally looked over at our large, loud group, but instead of feeling self-conscious, we felt powerful. We were taking up space, existing visibly and joyfully, refusing to hide or minimize ourselves. The restaurant staff treated us wonderfully, and we made sure to leave generous tips and positive reviews online. After that successful outing, we started planning more activities, going to the movies together, attending a local theater production, organizing a clothing swap where we could exchange gently used plus-size clothes, planning a day trip to a nearby state park. Each activity was carefully chosen to be accessible and comfortable for bodies of all sizes, and each one became an opportunity to practice existing in public spaces without shame. Several women told me that these group outings gave them courage to do similar things on their own or with their families, activities they had avoided for years because of fear and shame. I was also contacted by a social worker from a local high school who had heard about our group. She asked if I would be willing to come speak to a group of teenage girls about body image and self-esteem. I was terrified. What did I know about speaking to teenagers? What if they thought I was ridiculous, some old fat lady trying to preach to them? But the social worker was persuasive. "These girls need to hear from someone like you," she said. "They need to see an older woman who is confident and happy in her body, who has lived a full life despite not fitting society's beauty standards. They need hope that their worth isn't determined by their appearance." So I agreed, and Patricia came with me for moral support. We spoke to about 20 girls, ages 14 to 17, in the school's counseling center. I shared my story, the lifetime of discrimination, the ferry incident in New York, the decision to stop accepting mistreatment, the support group we had started. I talked about wasting so much of my life hating my body instead of appreciating it for all the things it could do and had done. I talked about how their generation had a chance to do things differently, to reject harmful beauty standards earlier, to support each other in loving their bodies as they are. The girls were more engaged than I expected. They asked thoughtful questions. They shared their own struggles with body image, with social media pressure, with comparing themselves to others. Several girls had tears in their eyes when I talked about the decades I spent hating myself and believing I wasn't worthy of love and respect. One girl, maybe 15 years old, raised her hand and said, "I've been on a diet since I was 12 years old. My mom is always dieting too, and we talk about food and calories and weight constantly. But listening to you makes me wonder if there's a different way. Like, what if I just accepted my body and focused on other things? What if I didn't waste my teenage years and my 20s the way you wasted your time? What would that even look like?" I didn't have all the answers for her, but I encouraged her to explore body-positive content online, to find communities of young people who were rejecting diet culture, to have honest conversations with her mother about the harm that constant dieting and negative body talk was causing. After our talk, several girls came up to hug me and thank me for sharing my story. The social worker told me it was the most engaged she had ever seen the girls during a presentation. She asked if we would come back regularly to lead an ongoing group for girls struggling with body image issues. Patricia and I agreed immediately, both of us feeling like this was important work that could genuinely make a difference. 6 months after that first meeting in the library, our support group had grown to over 200 members in the Facebook community and consistent attendance of 40 to 50 women at monthly in-person meetings. We had evolved beyond just a support group into something bigger, an advocacy organization, a social community, an educational resource, and a force for change in our local area. Patricia and I had taken on more formal leadership roles, and we had recruited several other women to help with different aspects of what we were doing. We launched a campaign to create a directory of size-friendly businesses in our area. We asked group members to nominate and review businesses based on criteria we developed together. Did they carry a full range of sizes? Did they have comfortable seating that accommodated larger bodies? Did staff treat plus-size customers with respect? Were dressing rooms and bathrooms accessible and comfortable? We compiled this information into a publicly available guide that we shared online and distributed in printed form around the community. The response was overwhelmingly positive, both from plus-size people who finally had reliable information about where they would be welcomed and treated well, and from businesses who wanted to be included in our directory and asked for advice on becoming more size-inclusive. Several businesses proactively reached out to us after seeing the directory. A local boutique owner asked for consultation on expanding her size range and reorganizing her store to better serve plus-size customers. A restaurant manager wanted feedback on their seating and asked if our group would be willing to do a test visit to provide honest feedback about accessibility and comfort. A gym owner reached out wanting to create a more inclusive environment and asked if we could help train staff on respectful treatment of plus-size clients. These conversations felt significant. We were no longer just supporting each other privately. We were actively influencing how businesses in our community operated, making spaces more accessible and welcoming for everyone. We also started working with healthcare providers. Several women in our group, including a nurse named Jennifer who had joined early on, helped us develop a list of questions to ask when seeking size-friendly medical care. Does the office have chairs without arms? Do they have blood pressure cuffs and gowns in larger sizes? Will the doctor address my actual concerns rather than just telling me to lose weight? Do they have experience treating patients of all sizes? Jennifer used her professional connections to reach out to doctors in our area, offering to provide training on weight-neutral healthcare and respectful treatment of plus-size patients. Some doctors were defensive, but others were genuinely interested in learning how to serve their patients better. One physician, Dr. Rachel Morrison, was particularly enthusiastic. She attended one of our meetings to listen to women's experiences with healthcare discrimination, and what she heard clearly affected her deeply. "I went to medical school to help people," she told the group, "and hearing how many of you have been harmed by the medical system, by doctors who were supposed to care for you, it's heartbreaking and infuriating. I want to do better. I want to be the kind of doctor you feel safe going to." She became our go-to recommendation for primary care, and she started speaking to other physicians about weight-neutral healthcare approaches. Having a medical ally made such a difference for our community. I was invited to speak at a regional conference on health equity and body diversity. Me, Maggie Thompson, a 63-year-old grandmother from Ohio who had never given a public speech in her life beyond talking at our support group meetings. The organizers had heard about our work and wanted me to share our story and discuss the importance of grassroots organizing. I was terrified but also honored. Patricia helped me prepare, and Emma offered to come with me for support. Standing on that stage in front of 200 healthcare providers, social workers, and community organizers, I felt my hands shaking and my voice wavering at first. But then I remembered the fairy, remembered finding my voice in that moment, and I channeled that same courage. I told them about my experiences with medical discrimination, about the countless appointments where my actual symptoms were ignored in favor of lectures about my weight. I told them about the women in our group who had delayed seeking care because they were so traumatized by past experiences with healthcare providers. I told them about Beverly being forced to buy 2 airplane seats, about Ashley being denied a promotion, about Carol's own mother constantly criticizing her size. I told them that body size was not a reliable indicator of health, that fat people deserved respectful care regardless of their health status, and that healthcare providers had an ethical obligation to do better. The audience was engaged, many taking notes, and the question and answer session afterward went on for over an hour because people had so many questions and wanted to learn more. After the conference, I was approached by a woman who introduced herself as Dr. Linda Chun, a professor at a nearby university's social work program. "Your presentation was powerful," she said. "Would you be willing to come speak to my students? They're training to be social workers, and they need to hear directly from community members about issues of discrimination and advocacy. I think you could teach them things that I can't." I agreed, and that led to several guest lectures at the university, speaking to classes about body diversity, discrimination, grassroots organizing, and the importance of meeting communities where they are rather than imposing outside solutions. Our work also expanded to include advocacy for policy changes in our community. We learned that the local transit system had seats that were uncomfortable or inaccessible for many plus-size people, making public transportation difficult or impossible for them to use. Several women in our group testified at a city council meeting about their experiences and the need for more accessible public transit. We created a petition that gathered over 3,000 signatures. We met with transit officials to discuss specific changes that could be made. It was a long process, but eventually the Transit Authority committed to purchasing new buses with wider seats and more accessible design. That felt like a real victory. We had pushed for systemic change and actually achieved it. I started writing more regularly, not just Facebook posts but longer essays and articles about body acceptance, discrimination, aging as a plus-size woman, and the importance of advocacy. A regional magazine published one of my essays, which led to more invitations to speak and write. I wasn't trying to become some kind of public figure. That honestly made me uncomfortable. But I realized that sharing my story and the stories of the women in our community could create change, could reach people who needed to hear these messages, could challenge harmful societal attitudes about bodies and worth. Emma, who is now 19 and in college studying communications, started helping me manage social media and develop content for our group. She created Instagram and TikTok accounts where we shared body-positive messages, highlighted size-friendly businesses, posted about upcoming events, and amplified the voices of plus-size people in our community. The younger women in our group were particularly active on these platforms, creating content that reached audiences we hadn't been able to reach before. Our message was spreading far beyond our initial monthly meetings in the library. We also connected with national organizations working on similar issues. I attended a conference in Chicago for fat activists and body liberation advocates, and I was amazed to find myself in rooms full of people who were doing this work at different scales, some locally like us, others at state or national levels. I met authors whose books I had bought after my trip to New York. I met activists who had been fighting for size acceptance for decades. I met younger people who were bringing fresh energy and new perspectives to the movement. I felt part of something larger than myself, larger than our small Ohio community, part of a genuine movement for change. At that conference, I participated in a panel discussion about starting grassroots support groups. Other organizers from around the country asked questions about how we structured our meetings, how we handled conflict within the group, how we funded our activities, how we dealt with negative attention and criticism. Sharing what we had learned and hearing what others were doing gave me so many ideas for how we could continue to grow and evolve our work. I came back from Chicago energized and full of plans. One of the most meaningful developments was when several women from our group decided to organize a plus-size fashion show. They wanted to create an event that celebrated fat bodies, showcased beautiful clothing in larger sizes, and demonstrated that style and beauty aren't limited to straight-sized bodies. They recruited models from our community, real women of all ages, shapes, and sizes, and partnered with local boutiques and online retailers who carried plus-size clothing. The show was held at a local theater, and over 300 people attended. Seeing those women walk down the runway, confident and beautiful and proud, many of them crying happy tears, was one of the most moving experiences of my life. I thought about how far we had all come. A year earlier, many of these women, including me, would never have imagined putting themselves on display like this, drawing attention to their bodies, claiming space so visibly and unapologetically. But here we were, creating beauty and joy and celebration, refusing to hide or apologize, demanding to be seen and valued. My daughter Jennifer attended the fashion show and cried through the entire thing. Afterward, she hugged me tightly and said, "Mom, I'm so proud of you. You've created something so important, something that's changing lives. And watching you become this confident, powerful woman has inspired me to stand up for myself more too." Not everything was smooth sailing, of course. As our visibility increased, so did the backlash. We received increasingly hostile messages on social media. Someone created a fake Facebook page mocking our group. We were featured on a podcast that ridiculed body positivity and played clips from my conference talk out of context to make me sound ridiculous. Several members of our group received harassing messages telling them they were going to die early because of their weight, that they were a burden on the healthcare system, that they were setting bad examples for children. The cruelty was constant and exhausting. One particularly difficult incident occurred when someone leaked the personal information of several group members. their full names, addresses, phone numbers, and workplaces, to online forums known for harassment campaigns. 3 women in our group were targeted with hundreds of hateful messages and phone calls. Ashley, the young woman who had shared her story about job discrimination at our very first meeting, had someone contact her employer claiming she was promoting unhealthy lifestyles and demanding she be fired. Her boss, thankfully, was supportive and dismissed the complaint, but the experience was traumatic for Ashley and frightening for all of us. We had to make difficult decisions about safety and privacy. We made the Facebook group private and screened new member requests more carefully. We stopped posting photos from our events publicly without explicit consent from everyone pictured. We discussed whether to continue with public advocacy or to scale back and focus just on supporting each other privately. It was painful to realize that standing up for ourselves and demanding respect came with real risks, that there were people who were so threatened by fat people refusing to be ashamed that they would try to harm us. But we didn't back down. If anything, the harassment strengthened our resolve. Patricia said at one particularly difficult meeting, "They're coming after us because we're effective, because we're creating change, because we're threatening a status quo that benefits from keeping us ashamed and small. If we give up now, they win. We let them silence us. We let them push us back into invisibility. I don't know about you all, but I'm done being invisible." The women in the room erupted in applause, and we recommitted to our work, implementing better safety measures, but refusing to stop advocating for ourselves and our community. I also faced personal challenges. Some family members were not supportive of what I was doing. A cousin told me at a family gathering that I was embarrassing the family by being so public about my weight. An aunt said she was worried about my health and suggested I was encouraging unhealthy behaviors. Even one of my own children, my son Michael, expressed concern that I was going too far with the activism and that I should just focus on being healthy rather than making such a big deal about size acceptance. These comments hurt deeply, especially coming from family who I thought would support me. I tried to explain to Michael that health and respect aren't mutually exclusive, that I deserve to be treated with dignity regardless of my health status, and that our group wasn't promoting being unhealthy. We were promoting self-respect and demanding equal treatment. But he remained skeptical, influenced by societal messages about weight and health that I was actively working to challenge. Our relationship became strained, and for several months we barely spoke. It was painful to realize that not everyone, even people who loved me, would understand or support this transformation. There were also internal conflicts within the group. Not everyone agreed on the best approaches or strategies. Some women wanted to focus primarily on self-love and acceptance, while others wanted to prioritize political advocacy and systemic change. Some felt we should welcome allies of all sizes, while others wanted to keep the space exclusively for plus-size women. Some thought we should work within existing systems to create change, while others wanted to challenge and dismantle those systems entirely. Navigating these differences required patience, compromise, and lots of difficult conversations. One particularly heated debate occurred when we discussed whether to accept sponsorship money from a company that sold diet products, but wanted to support our fashion show. Some members felt we should take the money and use it for good purposes. Others argued that accepting money from a diet company would compromise our values and send the wrong message. The discussion became tense, voices were raised, and a few women left the meeting early in frustration. Patricia and I stayed up late that night talking about how to handle conflicts like this, how to create space for disagreement while maintaining community cohesion. We ultimately decided to turn down the sponsorship, but we lost a few members who felt we were being too rigid in our principles. Personally, I struggled with imposter syndrome. Who was I to be leading this movement, speaking at conferences, giving interviews to media? I was just a regular grandmother who had stood up for herself on a ferry. I didn't have formal training in activism or community organizing or social justice. I hadn't even known what fat activism was a year ago. I worried constantly that I was going to say or do something wrong, that I would let people down, that I wasn't qualified for this role I had somehow found myself in. These doubts kept me up at night, made me second-guess every decision, and sometimes made me want to quit altogether. But then I would receive a message from someone like Maria in Michigan, who told me that our group had literally saved her life, that she had been suicidal because of how much she hated herself and her body, but finding our community gave her hope and a reason to keep living. Or I would see Ashley, who had been targeted by harassment, showing up at our meetings still, refusing to be silenced, continuing to advocate despite the risk. Or I would watch the young women from the high school group we started, talking confidently about body acceptance and calling out fat-phobic comments in their schools. And I would remember why this work mattered, why it was worth continuing despite the obstacles and the doubts. I also faced a health scare that forced me to confront my own beliefs about weight and health. I experienced some chest pain and shortness of breath, and when I finally went to the doctor, our ally Dr. Morrison, thankfully, tests revealed that I had developed atrial fibrillation, an irregular heartbeat. Dr. Morrison assured me that this condition affects people of all sizes and isn't caused solely by weight, but she did recommend some lifestyle modifications and medications. I was terrified not just about my health but about how this would be perceived by others. Would people say, see, being fat is unhealthy? Would I be seen as a hypocrite for advocating for body acceptance while dealing with a health condition? I struggled with whether to share this diagnosis publicly. Part of me wanted to keep it private, to not give ammunition to people who wanted to use my health issues to discredit our message. But I also believed in authenticity and honesty, and I knew that many plus-size people dealt with health conditions while still deserving respect and dignity. So I posted about it in our Facebook group, acknowledging my fear and vulnerability, explaining that having a health condition didn't make me or anyone else less worthy of respect, and reaffirming that health status, whatever it might be, should never determine whether someone is treated with dignity. The response from our community was overwhelmingly supportive. Women shared their own health conditions, diabetes, high blood pressure, joint problems, and many others, and talked about how they had learned to separate their worth from their health status, to advocate for good medical care while refusing to accept shame or blame. A woman named Teresa said something that really resonated with me. Thin people get sick too. Thin people have health problems too, but they're not blamed for their conditions the way we are. They're not told that they deserve to suffer because of their body size. Health isn't a moral obligation, and our worth as human beings isn't determined by our test results or our diagnoses. If you also believe in the transformative power of plus-size women, leave your like and comment on how this story inspired you. The real turning point came about 15 months after my trip to New York, on a cold February evening that I will never forget. Our group had organized a community forum called Every Body Belongs, creating size-inclusive spaces in our community. We had invited local business owners, city officials, healthcare providers, educators, and community members to attend. I was nervous about the turnout. Would anyone actually show up? Would we be preaching to the choir or actually reaching people who needed to hear our message? The library's large meeting room was packed. Over 200 people attended, far more than we had anticipated. We had to bring in extra chairs, and some people stood along the walls. The audience included business owners genuinely interested in learning how to better serve plus-size customers, city council members concerned about accessibility, healthcare providers wanting to improve their practice, teachers interested in addressing body image issues with students, and plus-size community members eager to share their experiences. The energy in the room was electric, a sense that something important was happening. I opened the forum by sharing my story one more time, but with more confidence and polish than I had ever managed before. I talked about the ferry incident, about the lifetime of discrimination that preceded it, about the decision to stop accepting mistreatment, about the community we had built. But I also talked about what we were asking for, not special treatment, not preferential access, just basic respect, dignity, and equal treatment. I talked about how creating size-inclusive spaces wasn't just good ethics, it was good business. I talked about how everyone benefited when we built a more inclusive, accepting community. Then we heard from members of our group who shared their experiences in different contexts: employment discrimination, healthcare trauma, difficulties accessing public spaces, challenges in finding appropriate clothing, issues with airline travel, and more. Each story was powerful and specific, illustrating the real-world impacts of size discrimination. A city council member who had initially seemed skeptical was visibly moved when Beverly shared her experience of being publicly humiliated on an airplane and forced to buy 2 seats. A boutique owner took notes furiously when several women talked about the difficulty of finding stylish clothing in larger sizes and what that meant for their self-esteem and their willingness to spend money at local businesses. We also brought in expert voices. Dr. Morrison spoke about health at every size and weight-neutral healthcare approaches, challenging common misconceptions about weight and health. Dr. Chun, the social work professor, talked about the research on weight discrimination and its psychological impacts. A lawyer who had joined our group discussed the legal protections that do and don't exist for size-based discrimination and what policy changes could address this gap. The combination of personal stories and expert testimony made for a compelling and comprehensive presentation. The question and answer session was remarkable. Instead of the hostile or skeptical questions I had feared, most questions were genuine requests for information and guidance. What can I do to make my restaurant more welcoming to plus-size customers? How should I talk to my daughter about body image? What should I look for in a size-friendly healthcare provider? How can I be a better ally to plus-size colleagues? What resources exist for educators who want to address body diversity and bullying in schools? We had prepared handouts with practical resources and recommendations, and we ran out of copies within the first 30 minutes. But the most powerful moment came near the end of the forum. A young woman, maybe in her early 20s, stood up during the open mic portion and said, "My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I need to apologize." My heart started racing. Could it be? As she continued talking, I realized it was the blonde woman from the ferry, the one who had harassed me that morning in New York over a year ago. "I was the person who harassed Mrs. Thompson on the ferry to the Statue of Liberty," she said, her voice shaking. "I said terrible, cruel things to her. I recorded her to mock her on social media. I was removed from the ferry by security. And I have thought about that day every single day since then." The room was completely silent. Sarah's eyes were filled with tears. I was raised in a culture that taught me that being fat was the worst thing you could be, that fat people were lazy and undisciplined and deserved to be treated badly. I internalized those messages so completely that I thought I was being funny, that I was somehow superior, that my cruelty was justified. But seeing Mrs. Thompson stand up for herself, hearing the other passengers support her, being held accountable for my behavior, it shattered something in me. I started questioning everything I had been taught about bodies and worth, and who deserves respect. She continued, "I went to therapy. I educated myself. I started listening to fat activists and reading about body liberation. I confronted my own eating disorder that I had been hiding behind healthy eating and fitness. I realized that my cruelty toward fat people was actually rooted in my own fear of fatness, my own disordered relationship with my body. And I am so sorry for the harm I caused, not just to Mrs. Thompson, though especially to her, but to every fat person I ever mocked or judged or treated as less than human. I can never undo that harm, but I want to spend the rest of my life being better, doing better, advocating for size acceptance, and fighting against the discrimination I once participated in." I sat there stunned, tears streaming down my face. Of all the things I had imagined might happen at this forum, this was not one of them.